They contribute significantly to local economies. They populate sectors tied to innovation and culture. And many times they're living in cities and states that have higher income taxes, so they pay those higher city and state income taxes.
And that's one of the major reasons why so many LGBTQ plus people say it's expensive being gay. I think the biggest threat to your financial future is inflation or taxes. Not today. One of the biggest money stories of 2025 is that LGBTQ plus Americans aren't just thinking about leaving the United States, they're actually doing it.
And the economic consequences are bigger than anyone's talking about.
Welcome to Living Not So Fabulously,
where we're cutting through the noise and talking honestly about what really shapes queer financial lives.
Today, it's just David and me. No guest, just a real conversation about two things. One, why LGBTQ plus people are leaving, from trans Americans fleeing for safety, to a U.S. citizen seeking asylum abroad, to queer families getting EU citizenships by ancestry.
And what it means for the U.S. economy when a community with $1.4 trillion in purchasing power starts taking that money and talent elsewhere.
Welcome to the show, David.
Welcome to the show, John. So we're going to start this show with talking a little bit about some social aspects and some social commentary, but we're going to be ending it with the impact on local, state, and national economies. So we are breaking this into two pieces, but really want you to stick around for those economic impacts of what we're talking about.
So this really all started to bubble up. We noted a marked shift in the last couple of months of the dialogue of the people in our community changing. For years, and typically every election, right? If the commentary is that if my particular president isn't nominated, or if things don't work out the way that I want in this election, I'm going to leave the country. I'm going to get out of here. And it always seems like an empty threat or an empty promise. We noticed a significant shift in the last couple of months on our direct messages on social media with the people that we work with one-on-one, as well as the emails that we get from our community and others that we see on social media, that they've actually already left. The dialogue, the language has changed. It's gone from I'm planning to move to we moved, we're gone, we couldn't wait. And this is no longer theoretical. We're having more and more people reaching out to us saying it's actually already happened. We can't wait to see if things get better, because at this point we don't think things will get better. And even though some news outlets seem to be covering this isn't being discussed very much, and nobody's really talking about the economic impact, which is what we hope to dive into today.
But there are some major reports, John. You and I have talked a bit about this. There are some major reports out there talking about how this truly is happening, whether it's Time Magazine, The Independent, and even an organization that John and I have connected with that it is in Europe that is seeing this. We are truly seeing a flight of individuals outside the United States. And a lot of this is related to a number of political issues. It's due to safety concerns. It's due to state level shifting or targeting trans individuals, the families of these individuals. These kinds of individuals are relocating. We actually have a friend of ours who is sending their child to school in Toronto so that they can be in Toronto long enough so that they qualify for citizenship in Canada. And they do not plan to come back to the United States. They plan to carry on their career there. As well as I mentioned, we connected with an organization in Europe that specifically helps individuals to find out whether or not through ancestry they can move to the EU and gain EU citizenship. And what they have told us is that they have seen a 400% increase in the number of LGBTQ folks who are reaching out to them, asking them if they can find a way to move to Europe. So we're truly seeing not just anecdotal evidence from you and me, but actually various reports and hard data that is showing individuals are leaving the country.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes when this conversation comes up, at least what I see on social media and what some people have said in other platforms, is that, well, so what? Who really cares? A lot of people don't want LGBTQ plus people in the United States anyway. So what's the big deal, right? It can only be a net positive for the United States. But when you factor in the other impacts of people leaving, in particular, the effects on the economy, it's a considerable impact on the economy that we say that we're trying to save and even strengthen.
Yeah. So if you're just tuning in, this is Living Not So Fabulously, where we turn real life trends into economic analysis. We're chatting today about why so many LGBTQ people are actually leaving the US.
Yeah, so I think it would be helpful for those who maybe aren't in the community who might want to understand why there would be so many people trying to leave the United States, so many LGBTQ plus people. If you've been paying attention to politics, you might have picked some of this up. But ever since the election, a lot more LGBTQ plus people just feel like it's not necessarily safe here. It's particularly members of the transgender community. And they're seeing, there are lots of reports of more and more trans people being verbally and physically assaulted and attacked in the United States because the rhetoric in the country has gotten to such levels where people feel safe in doing that to their fellow citizens. But there's also been a market shift in anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. We know that the Kim Davis case that went to this, that was supposed to go to the Supreme Court was denied, but we know that there are other cases that are coming down the pike trying to overturn Obergefell v. Hodges.
I think that there's 5, actually. I think that right now there are 5 or 6 states that have cases lined up already that they want to go to the Supreme Court.
Right. And as you said on other episodes, as well as our other podcasts, every 4 years you have same-sex couples who are wondering whether or not their marriage is still going to be validated and what consequence does that have on their financial situation.
It's exhausting. I mean, we do this, we play this game every 4 years of, we need to get our will and estate planning documents updated and make sure that we're protected in a very variety of ways. So it's not just emotional, but it's also financial impacts.
Right. And the Trump administration is expelling trans veterans who have served in some cases for decades in the military, and they're now not going to have a retirement or a pension to rely on, leaving them broke and in many cases on the street. So here are people who have spent their entire lives serving their country, and now they're not going to get the protection and the benefits that they were promised when they signed up.
Yeah, it does make you wonder, is this a place where I want to spend the rest of my life?
A lot of people are asking that question.
Yeah, so where are LGBTQ Americans going? Well, data shows that a lot of individuals are moving to countries like Portugal, Spain, Ireland. We had the example of Rosie O'Donnell taking her child there because wanting to have them feel like they were protected under the law. Countries like Italy, the Netherlands, Mexico, in England, we know that Ellen DeGeneres has moved there, and other individuals, not just LGBTQ individuals, are moving to these countries, or at least establishing residency in these countries because they feel like they need to have a plan B or an escape plan. And the reality is that when they look at a lot of these countries, it's not just that the people of that country are respecting them and allowing them to have the freedoms that they themselves have. It's actually written into the Constitution, or in some cases, the electorate have voted to have the same rights for LGBTQ individuals as non-LGBTQ individuals.
Yeah, and we know from the work that we've done, probably the most popular countries right now are Portugal and Spain, even though Spain is shifting a little bit to the right. But Portugal, I mean, pretty much has its arms open for the LGBTQ plus community. And I think that's why so many LGBTQ plus people are fleeing to Portugal. And they're using D7 and D8 visas, but they're also using particularly golden visas, which for those who aren't familiar, you can invest $500,000 or more in Portugal, €500,000 or more in Portugal, and that qualifies you for a residency, and then in time you'll qualify for getting a visa and eventually a Portuguese passport. But that, when you think about that alone, they're taking that $500,000. They're not investing it.
No, in based on the the transaction, the conversion rate, in some cases, it's actually close to $600,000 that they're moving
Right.
out of the US and into.
Putting it into Portugal, whether they're buying real estate in Portugal or they're investing in different funds in Portugal, and those funds are predominantly invested in Portuguese companies. Sometimes more European countries, but predominantly Portuguese companies.
Yeah.
So that's money that's being taken out of the U.S. stock market that's going into the national stock market, and that's happening on a much broader scale, as we'll elaborate here shortly. That could have a significant impact not only on our stock market, but particularly the U.S. economy.
Yeah, we actually have a contact at one of these funds in Portugal that does offer the golden visa through investment, and they told us that 4 out of every 10 individuals who are coming to coming to Portugal and investing in their fund are LGBTQ individuals, same-sex couples who feel like they need to have that escape plan or plan B, or in some cases, some people have moved it into their plan A as their retirement plan to leave the country.
Yeah. So I just think it's very interesting how, I mean, this is a major life change that people are making, and they do it on both sides, right? How many celebrities have said, "I'm going to leave the country if my particular president person isn't necessarily elected as president," and it never really goes anywhere. It's almost like it's a cliche at this point. But I think what we're arguing is that from our experience, and to be clear, David and I have come up with a plan B ourselves, so that if we feel like we need to leave the country, we now have an option that we didn't necessarily have a couple months ago. But now people are actually, actually doing it, and that could have crazy impact on the economy. So we'll be right back after we take a quick break. Welcome back to Living Not So Fabulously. We're back talking today about a growing trend of LGBTQ plus people leaving, or even in many cases fleeing, the United States.
So let's talk about this on a macro level. One of the questions that people are asking is, what happens if LGBTQ Americans start leaving? Even in small migration shifts, what happens when these people leave? Well, when you look at LGBTQ households, they spend more money per household. They often have fewer children, so that means they have more discretionary income. They contribute significantly to local economies. They populate sectors tied to innovation and culture. And many times they're living in cities and states that have higher income taxes, so they pay those higher city and state income taxes.
And that's one of the major reasons why so many LGBTQ plus people say it's expensive being gay, because in many cases we've already fled states and cities where we didn't feel comfortable so that we could be in states and cities where we do feel comfortable. Unfortunately, those states and cities are typically more expensive just by virtue of their tax structure.
Yeah, and for those of you who are Gen Z and millennials, LGBTQ Americans are oftentimes ones who support nightlife, hospitality, tourism, a lot of the things that you do that you enjoy in your life. Some of these may be gone because LGBTQ Americans, especially even younger ones, are deciding that it's maybe better for them to either leave or save money so they can leave the country.
So it's been widely reported over the last couple of years that the LGBTQ plus community has a purchasing power of $1.4 trillion. And to put that into somewhat perspective, that somewhat aligns with the purchasing power of the Asian community. And that's concentrated in high-cost, high-income urban centers. We're concentrated in creative industries, technology, healthcare, hospitality, entrepreneurship. And we overperform economically relative to population size in these industries.
Yeah, so let's talk about the actual economic impact. Let's just say that 1% of LGBTQ Americans decided to leave. And this is kind of what economists might say is an entry-level economic drain or impact. If 1% of LGBTQ adults in the United States, or roughly 200,000 individuals, decided to leave the country, the immediate spending loss would be, based on that $1.4 trillion, roughly $14 billion
A year.
a year. We are talking about those kinds of numbers when it comes to tariffs and other economic impacts that are going on in the country right now due to policy. It also would mean that based on taxes and GDP, that loss would balloon to somewhere around 40 to $50 billion a year, equivalent to the GDP of some of the smaller states in the country.
Yeah. So if you put that into perspective, that's like pretty much saying we'll just let go of, Alabama or Louisiana or Kentucky.
Idaho, Idaho, Dakota.
Yeah. I mean, and that has a significant impact on the national economy.
Right. Yeah. And one of the other things to think about when we're looking at these scenarios, as John and I mentioned, some individuals are looking about doing this through investment, pulling out hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, or even billions of dollars out of the US stock market because they want to invest in another country like Portugal, Greece, Brazil. Some of these countries are opening their arms and saying, please come invest in our stock market. And actually, in some cases, doing better than your stock market. And so these individuals are like, well, why wouldn't I do this? I have an exit plan and I can take my investments abroad with me and earn even more.
Yeah, I will say that this is more anecdotal than we have anything to actually specific to report, but we have heard more and more people saying that they do want to diversify away from their U.S. investments because things do seem a little bit more volatile here. And even though the market is performing great, there is the concern that it's sort of overweighted in technology and that we're sort of in this AI bubble. And while that could have a long-term benefit, things could be kind of helter-skelter until we actually figure out what that looks like.
Right.
And that for a lot of people who are in retirement age or nearing retirement age, that's kind of volatility that they don't necessarily want to weather.
Yeah, and we actually spoke with one investor who said to us that they had moved their money to another country and they did this at the very beginning of the year. And just the fact that the value of the dollar dropped meant that their assets had improved by 10% because the value of the dollar had dropped by more than 10%. So they got a 10% gain just from the swing in the dollar value dropping. And then on top of that, they were getting a 20% return so far this year on the investments that they had made in the other country. So while their U.S. portfolio was only growing at about 9 to 10%, their overseas portfolio had grown by over 30%. So let's take this even to a larger level. Let's just say there was actually a stampede of individuals leaving the LGBT community and a whopping 5% left. We know that not everyone can afford to do this. It is expensive to pick up and move. But if 5% of us left, or just 1 million U.S. LGBTQ Americans left the country, we're looking at an economic impact of about $300 to $400 billion a year. That is more than all of the money that has been raised through tariffs so far this year. It would be an economic impact that economists would probably start to call a talent flight, a brain drain. Easy for you. My brain has been drained today. Capital reallocation and a structural economic weakening. The country would be suffering in a way that many people don't necessarily understand. Again, pointing to the idea that not only are we seeing people leaving with their jobs, leaving with their businesses, going to another country, but a lot of individuals who would be spending their retirement income, they're leaving the country. We're talking about a significant number. So that the more severe these laws seem to get, the more likely we're going to see a scenario like this happen.
And even if it's not necessarily, even if these laws become more egregious for the LGBTQ plus community, it's just the threat of it being there. As we said, every 4 years, you're kind of like, how are things, is my marriage going to be dissolved? Am I suddenly going to lose my Social Security survivor and spousal benefits? Am I going to be able to visit my spouse in the hospital?
Am I going to lose my military pension?
Right.
Am I going to be able to see my spouse in the hospital, like you said, or am I going to be able to take care of my child in the way that they need to be taken care of?
Right. So if you have the opportunity to be able to bounce, there's a very good chance that you'll take that opportunity. And I guess, like you said, this isn't a cheap thing to do. And whether it's cheap or not, it's still a major life change that these people are willing to make.
Yeah.
And you think about the psychology of somebody who is willing to make that kind of life change. I mean, it sort of like really highlights or narrows down the idea of the brain drain. The people who are willing to take risks. If they're willing to take this kind of geographic risk, what kind of risk are they willing to do in maybe growing their own business or investing in a small startup? Well, they're not doing that in the United States. I mean, a couple of months ago, we had Maddie on, who was a Canadian.
She covers trade negotiations.
Sorry, trade negotiations between the United States and Canada. And she shared that more and more LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs are looking to start their startup in Canada because everything is too volatile here for the LGBTQ plus community here in the United States. Well, when those companies start in Canada, they're probably never going to come back.
Right.
It's going to be really costly to move an entire company, especially if it's super successful, to move an entire company from Canada to the United States. Why would you do that unless there was some real amazing incentives, right? Why does this matter for people who are LGBTQ plus? Well, as we're kind of hopefully elaborating, this is going to affect the housing market, which is already challenged. It's going to affect the labor market, which is already challenged. It's going to affect local and state tax revenues, which I thought that was something we were trying to solve for. This doesn't even touch on the effects on the healthcare system and the percentage of LGBTQ plus people who work in the healthcare system, but it's going to affect tourism, cultural vitality, small business ecosystems. I mean, you're losing LGBTQ plus consumers. You're also losing LGBTQ plus employees or LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs. You're losing spending that fuels entertainment, hospitality, retail, tourism. Some of the most at-risk sectors of the economy are going to be adversely affected if we lose more and more LGBTQ plus people. And maybe some people don't care. That could be.
That's true. But I think for those individuals who say don't care, they probably do care about the financial impacts that it could take on their wallet and on the stock market if individuals do start to leave en masse.
Yeah. So I think the takeaway for this episode is, especially for those people who aren't members of the LGBTQ plus community, to start thinking about what is the state of the economy, what is the state of the stock market, what is the state of the United States if we continue to chase away everybody who doesn't look or love like us.
Yeah. And I think you've mentioned this in other shows. If we are a country that really truly does open its arms with freedom and say liberty and justice for all, we need it to be liberty and justice for all. So thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions or suggestions for us, just email us at yfpodcast@yahooinc.com. If you like what you see, scan the QR code to follow Yahoo Finance Podcast for more videos and expert insights.
And until next time,
stay fabulous.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.